Welcome to Co-Pilots.
Hey everybody, my name is Sean. Well, we already said that, right? Like we already said, I'm Sean and I'm Andy.
Yeah, so you can say it again. He never gets old.
All right. Well, I'm Andy Secunda.
No, that's not. Oh, you're misleading them.
Hey everybody, welcome to Co-Pilots. I am Sean Conroy.
And I'm Andy Secunda.
On this podcast, we talk about TV pilots, the first episodes of television shows. Sometimes pilots become long-running series. Others don't make it past that first episode.
We're going to talk about all of them. The great pilots, the bad pilots, the weird pilots, the forgotten pilots. We are TV writers, but it should be noted that we are the dumbest TV writers you know, so all of these are just our dumb opinions.
So dumb. So today we're talking about Walker, Texas Ranger, the pilot of an amazing show, an amazing time in American life. The show debuted in April of 1993. Just to give everybody a little bit of context on April 1993, just 2 days before this, the Branch Davidian complex in Waco, Texas burned to the ground thanks to interference from the Department of Justice. So there was a lot going on in Texas when the show came on. The most popular song in the country at that time was Informer by Snow. You were a big Snow fan, right?
That's true. It was really, if you look in my room at that time, it's just posters of snow.
You love 12 inches of snow, right?
That's right.
Yeah. There was also a big announcement right around that time in television, which was that David Letterman, this happened a few days after Walker, Texas Ranger came on, David Letterman was going to be replaced by a young comedy writer named Conan O'Brien, and everybody thought that was a crazy decision. Nobody ever even heard of this guy. Have you heard of him at this point?
I did. I actually worked at the show for 2 years.
Was he any good?
Yeah, I mean, he lasted a very long time on that show, and I was there for 2 years of it. And I remember watching it in the first episode with Andy Blitz, who we both know. And I think we both...
Who also wrote for the show.
Right. And both of our reactions were, that's it. He's going to do all the comedy. We're never going to get to do any comedy because he'll have done all of it. Which turned out to not be accurate, even though he did a lot of great comedy.
You liked what he did.
Yes. And then I got to work on it.
Right. So we have this amazing show based on the movie Lone Wolf McQuade. The show ends up lasting 9 seasons, and it's all thanks to this pilot.
I don't know that I've ever, as a matter of fact, I have never seen a full episode of Walker, Texas Ranger before watching this pilot.
I have seen 0 Walker, Texas Ranger before today when I watched the pilot.
And I'm assuming you, like myself, know this primarily as a punchline.
Sure, like not even that, because it's not like I watched that Conan O'Brien show where it became a punchline.
Right. Which happened after my time, by the way. So
right. But I just was aware of Chuck Norris as a cultural figure.
Right.
And just had no opinion on Walker, Texas Ranger, except that it was probably not good.
I only knew it as a bit and as like a thing to make fun of. I mean, it's what did it last 9 seasons?
Yeah.
So the joke's on me, really.
Right.
But it was very interesting, kind of entering this and watching this cold, because it's such a snapshot of an action movie, really, aesthetic at that time.
Going way back, like I felt like a lot of it was very almost 70s, you know?
Yes.
Like Chips, Dukes of Hazzard, that kind of thing.
Well, that's what's interesting about it, is because it's TV, it's sort of a mixture of the kind of Schwarzenegger, Stallone kind of uber man action kind of, kill line quips, even though nobody's really killed in this episode,
right,
as far as I can remember, mixed with the kind of the ethic that Chuck Norris grew out of in the 70s.
By the way, the deputy is killed in this episode.
That is true. The deputy
very
is killed
early on.
Yes, you have to establish
nicest guy in the world.
His motivation that is forgotten for 80% of the episode and then hastily brought back at the end. What about this guy? Go and visit his grave.
Yeah, there was a lot of weird shit in this pilot.
Anyway, it was really fascinating to watch as this snapshot of, it was just, they were clearly aiming for such a specific demo. So this was derived from Lone Wolf McQuade.
I can't vouch for that 100%. I can say that I saw something today on the internet, which is a great place for getting information, but also misinformation and disinformation.
So this was carefully researched by you.
I don't have a big staff, so...
But for your sense is this was derived from...
So Lone Wolf McQuade came out in 1983.
Right.
I believe Chuck Norris played a Texas Ranger, and I think when they were putting this together, they were like, let's have him be a Texas Ranger. It worked so well in this movie.
Kind of like... if I was the writer of the original thing, I would be very frustrated that they basically...
But let's give him a different name.
But it has definitely the feeling, particularly the beginning, which do you want to just get into it?
Yeah.
But just the beginning, when it has Chuck Norris in the big letters, is Walker, Texas Ranger. It has the feel of a Chuck Norris movie,
Right.
Immediately, and his pickup truck coming over the horizon.
Well, I could see them just going, let's let Chuck Norris be Chuck Norris.
Sure.
You know?
And why not? It's a great idea. It's actually surprising. I would like to dig in and find out if Steven Seagal ever tried to do this before he did his reality show, because if not, he may have been too big for his britches and thought, no, I'm bigger than TV. But this is what preserved Chuck Norris in the American consciousness for so much longer than he would have.
It enabled him to sell a lot of those home gym equipment things.
Yeah, I mean that's really what
Absorcizer or whatever the thing is called.
And I think as a Chuck Norris fan, that's what I look to mostly as his greatest work.
His crowning achievement.
Yes.
I also, I'm sure there are people telling Seagal all the time, you got to stop wearing britches because they don't fit anymore.
So why don't we get into it and start talking about Walker?
Okay, so
Texas. I was doing
okay.
small.
You were spreading it out.
Walker, Texas.
He was a ranger.
Yes, he was.
Yeah. So we open, and there's some weird cinematography at the beginning of the very first shot. And I meant to look this up, and of course I don't have a staff to research this for me. But the very first shot is they pan across to a tree and then zoom in on the tree. It's like a pan and a zoom.
Yes,
and it's a weird looking shot.
They have that. You're right. It's almost, that is going to your point about 70s. That is an almost 70s sort of style, but it's a mishmash of styles because they also, it's a lot of flat TV, kind of just, shots at sort of waist level. And then it also has a ton of canted angles in this shot, which is sort of an off kilter angle that suggests like a little bit more menace, and it's just constant throughout this.
Right.
So.
There was times when I was like, am I watching Batman with Adam West? Like the way that things were tilted, it was anyway, at the end, and I won't spoil the ending, but I will say that at the end of the whole thing, I was like, I get why television was ready for the golden age. This was 93 to 2001. So by the end of the run of this show, there were people going, Jesus, fuck, we got to get something else out there, And it was on CBS, and I feel like it wasn't indicative of what later happened on CBS, but it sort of feels like it was playing to the heart of what CBS's sort of audience would have been, what their demo would have been. But it's interesting because I'm thinking of it as more of an older crowd that would have been watching it, and I wonder if you break down the demo, how much was children, because they have so many children plots, as well as the classic Conan bit with Haley Joel Osment that is Walker told me I have AIDS, I believe. I read about that today. I didn't, again, my research staff brought me some stuff. So we open on a robbery, an armored truck robbery, I guess. The truck has already been crashed. There are one of the guards from the truck is wounded. The other guard is embracing him as he bleeds out, or I don't know what was going on between those two, but the bad guys are trying to figure out what they should do.
And they immediately are like, hey, you know what's in these bags? A lot of honey. It's going to sweeten things for a long, long time. And the other guy says, well, the only honey I like walks on 2 legs. Ha!
So he likes women.
He's saying he likes, and apparently he doesn't like money or honey, I guess.
Actual honey.
He doesn't like actual honey.
Right.
He only likes women. So I don't know why he's going on these.
Right. Well, the actual honey
crimes.
thing is not a big deal. But if he doesn't like money, he should not be doing this. I also was fixated on the fact that one of the, so they look at the guards, the wounded guard and the other guard.
Right.
And one of the guys says, what do you want to do with him? Leave him?
Yeah.
And the other guy goes, in this heat, in the middle of nowhere, buzzards got to eat too.
Yeah.
So he's saying, let's let these guys die in this heat.
Sure.
They're gonna bake to death. Meanwhile, apparently that was not communicated to the costuming department because there are 4 bad guys. One of them is wearing a wool work shirt. Another guy is wearing a hunting jacket. Another guy is wearing a canvas duster. And the last guy is wearing a fleece vest.
It's also in no way an abandoned, like, remote area.
It's like around a curve.
It's like 4 different intersecting roads in that section. And I'll also say about what you're saying about the buzzards line right off the top, because there's so much kind of just strained, colorful dialogue between the criminals in this. And they're so proud of their buzzards line that later, in a later scene, when we come back to them and it's just them hanging out in a bar, they're still like, you know, laughing. Wonder if the buzzards got him. I remember when I got the buzzards line.
I think the reason for that was because we never get an explanation of how Walker, Texas Ranger found them at that place. And so when they say, like, I wonder if the buzzards got him, another guy says something like, oh, or what? Did they make a phone call and call the police or something?
Oh, that's why that's...
Yeah, and so we're like, yeah, they did. Here come the police.
Because you left them in a highly populated suburban area to die.
You thought they were going to bake to death, and it's 40 degrees outside. One of them got hypothermia, as he was supposedly... So these guys. Oh, so that's when we start to see Walker, Texas Ranger in almost. It was almost like a Coen Brothers shot of the truck coming up over the.
It's one of my favorite shots.
Yeah,
and then it really did in that moment. And I think it's fair to say, even for most of this pilot, and I'm gonna have a lot more problems than just the kinds of things Sean and I have already brought up with it, but. When I saw that and the truck is coming over the horizon with the heat lines and the Chuck Norris is Walker Texas Ranger and this sort of, it's like the movie Silverado kind of font and the typical 90s sort of guitar, I'm just like, I'm kind of in. This is great. This makes me want to watch Invasion USA, and all the rest of his ridiculous action movies. Like, yeah, sure, go for it.
Right, and we don't see him initially. We see like his hand on the wheel. We see his boot. We don't get a full glimpse of him at all, which I think is great in a pilot. Like,
it's also typical 90s action hero reveal from
it's like,
this time.
Wait until the exact moment when
we know who it is.
I also, not to get political, but it did make me understand a little better the whole border crisis thing that's going on, because the only thing we saw to let us know this was the border was a tiny wooden sign tacked to a tree that said Mexican border 2 miles, and it's like, no wonder we need to build a wall there if people are just looking at like, how are you going to even see that sign?
You're saying some people may not even know what side of the border they're on.
Yeah,
if we're to
like, we
believe the show.
There needs to be something else. Anyway, then we see these bad guys in their. It's in a bar, which is in somebody's house, which was a little confusing to me. Although I guess in college we had a bar in our room. But
is that what it's saying? They're in a dorm room.
But Chuck Norris shows up to the bar, and they all stop talking.
Yes.
And he just goes to the bar and
right.
gets himself a beer, and without turning around, he says, You boys are all under arrest.
This is to me, it's also classic of action heroes of this time that they are so intimidating in terms of their presence and just the raw power that the criminals sense, that in this room, I'm assuming full of criminals. I assume it's not even just the people that pulled off this heist at the beginning, but everyone's a criminal in there, that Walker can walk to the bar, not face them, and still be unafraid that he's about to be shot, stabbed, or attacked in any other way.
So you're saying everybody else was a criminal. I don't think so, because what happens is when he says, you boys are all under arrest, everybody else runs out of the bar knowing that there's going to be trouble. And what I thought was weird about that was he never how does he know that's not the guys he's arresting running away? It just hears like scuttle, 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 scuttle,
that
people
to me
running
suggests
away.
that maybe they are all criminals. I guess they're
That's
either
a
that
fair point, but
or they're good townspeople that are like, they're going to be trouble, and then they're just running away.
But it still doesn't answer the question of like, how does he know his people stayed?
100%, and then, or how does he know that his people aren't going to attack him? Right. And it also is, it's an ongoing theme in this pilot of, he's very confident that none of them have firearms. That these people who just pulled off a heist and blew up a truck.
And we know, because we watched from the beginning, that they do actually have firearms.
But he's still very confident that he can Chuck Norris his way and kick the hell out of them and win the fight, which he does. And he gives us immediately what we want to see in a Chuck Norris scene, which is him doing his kicks and his punches and his throwing people.
Right. There's 4 of us and 1 of you. And he goes, that sounds about right.
Which is, that's a little bit of a tepid response. I kind of expected him to, do the once upon a time in the West kind of response and just go. He knocks one down and goes, now there's 3 or something. But and I'm sorry to this shows how different our experience of cinema is. Yes.
Is that you reference Once Upon a Time in the West, and I'm like, or it's like the first Jack Reacher movie where there's 5 guys that he's about to have a fight with, and he's like, you 2 guys, I'm going to break your arms. You 2 guys are going to run away, and the last guy is going to drive you all to the hospital.
Sergio Leone's second greatest work is obviously the Jack Reacher.
Yeah. Never Go Back.
No. Is that the sequel? Or is
that's the sequel. Right, yeah. I can't remember what
I guess we'll cover Jack Reacher, the Jack Reacher series.
True, yeah,
at some point.
So he knocks these guys out, and then he has to drive them back to the States where they apparently committed their robbery. So he has to go across the border, and that's when we find out what his name is and that he does this on a regular basis. By the way, I did want to say that there was a moment when he gets out of his truck in the parking lot of the house/bar that these guys are hanging out in.
Yeah.
Before he even goes in, he opens the back of his pickup truck. Like he lets down the gate of the pickup truck.
Yeah.
I didn't understand what was happening, and my first thought was that an homage to the star of Puchinsky opening the mailbox when he...
It's just like in every pilot...
You got to have somebody drop something down.
Without explanation.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to ruin the theory. I believe he's always opening up the flatbed because he's about to put the criminals in.
Right,
there.
but that was that's what I'm saying. That was the first time we saw it, right. And I was like, I get it. I get what's going on. This guy, whoever directed this, watched Puchinsky, which came out 6 years later.
It is funny. One thing I was thinking about this with us having watched Puchinsky so recently is tonally, in terms of the insanity of tone and just sort of the extremeness of action hero-y kind of vibe, it's really just kind of missing a crazy dog puppet with Peter Boyle's voice in it. Yeah. It's not that far off. But this one went 9 seasons because there was one missing insane element.
Right.
I also liked, to your point about the Mexico border thing, that the immediately criminals are like, this is Mexico, Ranger. You got no right.
Right. And he says, No right. Or like he does some joke about he hits him with a right hand or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. He said, no right. I think that I do have a right.
Yeah. I think I have a pretty good right. I just hit you with my right hand.
Yeah. It's a long monologue. He says, it's just like, hey, how about that right that I just
Well,
we'll
get to his long monologue later, which actually
There's
does
a lot
happen.
of them.
Yeah.
And I think the rest of the credits come up at this point. It was created by Albert S. Ruddy, who was one of the Godfather producers. Leslie Grief. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Christopher Kanan and Paul Haggis.
Yeah.
Of Crash, $1 Million Baby. He wrote some Bond films, just like massive success. And I think he also was, I don't know if it was just sort of that it was connected to, but I believe he's also instrumental in the reboot of Walker, Texas Ranger called Walker.
Right. Yeah. So I have a quote here from Paul Haggis.
Great.
Because he, like you said, $1 Million Baby and Crash.
Yeah.
The first time a screenwriter had ever written Oscar-winning movies 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
He also very famously left Scientology. There was a huge New Yorker article about him leaving Scientology, which I remember reading and noticed that again today. But he said of Walker, Texas Ranger, I agreed to write the pilot because I thought it would just go away, but it became this huge hit. And I remember waking up at 3 or 4 in the morning in a cold sweat, dripping wet. I mean, I was drenched. I just pictured my tombstone and it said, Paul Haggis, creator of Walker, Texas Ranger, 1993.
And then you pull back and you see Chuck Norris standing over the graves.
With a feather.
Now it's time for payback.
Yeah. So the impetus for making these movies is really just to wipe that image from my mind. So that's why he got into writing screenplays.
See, Sean, we don't have a big enough, black mark on our record to motivate us to actually achieve greater success. That's what.
Not the only black mark on Paul Haggis's record, by the way. He was found guilty of sexual harassment by a jury, which, by the way, I don't know any of the details of that, but I will say being found guilty in a civil trial by a jury of sexual harassment does not mean you can't run for president of the United States. So
apparently
not to get political, but
I wonder if there's room for that on his tombstone.
I'm talking about waking up with a cold sweat in the middle of the night.
You got Crash, and then you have his record. Anyway,
so he gets these guys back to the States, and then we see where he hangs out, right?
Correct. Is that the next scene is when we meet CD.
Right. In CD's bar.
And played by, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing this correctly, Gaylord Sartain?
Oh, you're definitely pronouncing that correctly.
Pronunciation isn't one
Just
of my
rolls off the tongue.
My foremost skills. Who's typing this, and this starts what is an impressive amount of exposition from this character. Like
Holy
they will
shit.
stop the show.
Yeah.
For him to go into a description of not just his own backstory, but other characters' backstories unashamedly, just endless. And in this one, it's like it takes a lot of concentrating. He's typing at a typewriter, taking a lot of concentrating to be a writer. And Walker goes, yes, especially if you're writing about all the stuff you got us into when you were a ranger. One little bullet wound in your leg, says CD, and then doctors go all to pieces. So this is all to set up he's both writes an advice column. He also runs a bar. He also
was a Texas Ranger. Which, by the way, comes into play later when he walks into a bank they all think is going to be robbed while it's under surveillance. And I don't mean to get ahead, but while it's under surveillance by Walker and his partner, he just goes, "You can't stop me. I'm going in." Like crazy.
Yeah.
So anyway, they're hanging out in the bar. That's when the young deputy comes in,
Mobley,
and they, they know that the woman he loves wants a wedding ring.
So much stuff.
Yeah.
And he bought her jewelry that turns out to be fake, and I didn't catch it.
Harriet Wilson's Trading Post.
They're doing a lot of world building.
Yeah.
Is that?
I don't know if we're ever going to see that, but I just thought it was bizarre that, Harriet Wilson, like, again, talk about a name that rolls off the tongue,
And there's so much exposition. It's hard to tell when they're setting up the world like, oh, Harriet Wilson is going to be good at that old con Harriet Wilson who sells fake jewelry.
Oh, she got out of jail?
Or if it's just like, no, it's just to set up that Mobley bought fake jewelry because, as CD says, 15 years as a cop, 5 years as a ranger. I don't think I've ever run into anybody as innocent as he is. So it's like just to say his own backstory and that this guy's innocent.
So that when he gets killed, we're sad.
We're sad.
Yeah.
So much setup for him to be killed immediately, which I kind of actually in retrospect thought was heroic, because as soon as he faces criminals alone, like, oh, he's the classic action cop movie
sacrifice
to motivate the hero. Again, as I say, at the beginning and then at the very end and not at all in the middle.
Right. When I was a kid, I had a book called Jokes, Puns, and Riddles.
Uh-huh.
And it was all just street jokes. And it was jokes like the joke at the end of this. Like, I feel like they used a book like that at the end of this scene.
Yes.
To get out of the scene of...
Or at most scenes.
Somebody who... I don't know if they were supposed to be from another part of the South or from another country.
They had an indeterminate accent.
Right.
Yes.
And she was like, do you serve tourists here?
Yeah, that's very accurate. He's like, we used to. We couldn't chop them up into small enough pieces to fit them on a plate. It's just like, what? It's just, these fucking foreigners, right? America? It's just like, that's it? And they kind of, but they play it both sides of it, because they're like, we're leaving. And then...
He's kidding.
Walker assures them he's kidding, and then they kind of smile at each other like, this guy's great, and then sit down.
But you know that in the cut scene, there, like, what happened after that was they actually were served human flesh on a plate.
I think that what he was saying was they chop up the foreigners themselves and serve them on a plate.
It was foreign human flesh. It was somebody else who had the same issue when they came in.
I mean, I would have liked to have seen that scene. That would have hooked me.
So then we go back to Walker's house and we meet his Uncle Ray.
Right.
Who is Native American.
And he is his Alfred.
Yes.
I know he is his Alfred. At first I was like, I wrote to myself, is he his Alfred? And Uncle Ray says, I asked the same question of my tribal chief, with, of course, some sort of indigenous folk music, stereotypical music played underneath, when you were given me to raise after your father died, which is just like, again, so much exposition that everybody is just stating their backstory and what their relationship is immediately with no elegance at all. But the main thing is that I was just like, oh, well, this guy's Alfred. And just to jump ahead a little, he is absolutely his Alfred, because later on in the pilot we realize he took care of him after Walker's parents are killed and he was orphaned.
Right. And yeah, that's what I was going to say is after your father died, I was like, are they going to tell us how his father died? Is that
did you have a question in your head?
I knew it was going to happen. So then we go to a bank where there is a blind man who gets focused on by the cameras quite a bit. So it's confusing, and he's clearly wearing a fake beard and a hat and sunglasses.
Right.
So there's something going on with this guy. We don't quite know what it is.
Right. And while the robbery's happening, they kind of close up on a teller lady. And she does the most obtrusive and obvious move with her hand underneath the counter to hit the alarm. And then immediately looks around like the day player is really overplaying that moment.
I hope no one, like her motivation was, yes. I hope no one sees me.
It's quite clear that is what her motivation is.
So they steal a bunch of money, but they're taking longer than they're supposed to. They're supposed to only have 49 seconds left, but they actually take longer than that. I think they took 53, or I couldn't count it. But as they're leaving the bank, because they've taken too long, Mobley pulls up and has the drop on them.
Yes, and the innocent innocent Mobley is killed.
Before they can get into the escape wagon, they have a station wagon that they're going to get away in.
And this is when the visually impaired man comes out, and there's a weird shot of he has a cane, and then the next thing is a close-up, and he lifts a gun. Mm-hmm. And so neither of his hands had a gun in them. So I don't know if we're meant to assume that the cane somehow was a high-tech cane that turned into.
It's like one of those sword canes, but with a gun.
Right.
So he kills Mobley, and all those guys get away, and then they're very upset that Mobley has been killed.
They sure are.
Yeah. He never even had a chance to defend himself because he was trying to help the blind guy get away from the bank robbers. Didn't realize that guy was in on it.
You can see the subtext is do not help the visually impaired people.
Right. And then we come back to, and I guess we're in the town hall or whatever is where Walker, Texas Rangers office is.
Yeah, that's a good question.
It's some kind of government building of some sort.
Where you can have both the cops and
lots of officials, prosecutor. Right. So that's somebody we didn't talk about was Prosecutor Alex, who we met earlier when she was saying that there was no way he was going to get away with bringing those guys back from Mexico. And it turns out the governor was thrilled.
Cahill, played by Cherie J. Wilson.
I will say that I read a thing. This doesn't happen in this episode, but I read a thing somewhere that said that over the course of the 9 seasons of the series, Alex gets taken hostage 22 times.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It can't just be guest stars. It's got to be.
There's no stakes with guest stars. Yeah. And she also gets shot 3 times.
Sure. So, that's actually a pretty good record.
Yeah. So she doesn't want to be insensitive. She knows Mobley has just been killed, but this kind of, I was like, wow, that's really intense for the first episode.
Yeah.
She wants Walker to help out this 16-year-old girl who has been raped, a circus performer who...
Trapeze
artist, yeah.
Which is it's just a strange series of lines with upsetting information loaded in between. Mm-hmm. She was a trapeze artist. The circus is going to leave.
Trapeze?
What do you lean on?
Trapeze?
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 Trapeze or trapeze?
She was a trapeze artist.
And also the thing, so it's like the kind of comical references to the circus with the upsetting information about her assault, and then on top of that is the thing of her holding up the picture.
2 headshots.
She has 2 headshots, which are clearly like kind of high school, picture day kind of photos, except one's like, this is her. And then this is her with almost exactly the same background after these men were
the violent attack.
Yes. And it's clearly just to emotionally maneuver Walker. And it's very interesting because he's clearly a person who will do anything for anyone. And both her and CD it's constantly this kind of thing of like her trying to get Walker to let them stay at his ranch. And he's like, oh no, oh boy, now I got to do this. And it's sort of like, it's a strange series of beats to play with this character that's kind of like, aren't you always going to do that? Aren't you always the guy that like, so what is this schmuck bait of like, I'm not going to do it.
He's going to say no this time. Right. It's like they're creating contentiousness between the characters because that's fun.
Right.
And
it's kind of like a very artificial refusal of the call in hero's journey terms.
Yeah, I don't follow all that. But then we go back to the bad guy.
Refusing my call of understanding the refusal of the call.
I blocked you a long time ago.
Well, you should check out my screenwriting page.
Then we're back with the bad guys. And by the way, I found it difficult to keep straight who was who in this because it's all just like middle-aged white guys with mustaches.
It is a shocking lack of diversity, which is when they finally do. They're leading up to who the replacement cop's going to be, and I'm like,
right.
I'm assuming, and as soon as he says he's from Baltimore, I'm like, oh, all right,
Yeah.
Let's have a tiny bit of diversity in the show,
but in this,
except for Uncle Ray, in fairness,
right in this scene, we figure out who the I think he was the guy dressed with the beard, right?
Yeah.
Was the chief bad guy?
Yes.
Who, by the way, is that guy is my agent. I don't know if you know that, but yeah. But he beats up somebody, so he establishes his karate ability in this scene. So we know somewhere down the line, him and Walker Texas Ranger are going to have it out. They're going to duke it out. They're going to
have their
paint the
end
fence
of
and mend the
lethal
fence.
weapon mano a mano. Yeah.
And we find out they're going to make a big score in 5 days.
Right.
There's some plan in motion right
Yeah.
now. Then again, I'm like, who are these guys? And then I realized it's the 3 rapists in the truck.
Right.
Sitting across the street from City Hall, waiting for the girl that they attacked to be released.
And is the idea to remove her as a witness, or
I don't know. That's certainly not how they played it.
I was never really clear on why they were sort of staking out and waiting to rush in to Walker's
I
ranch
felt like
anyway.
they were doing that because they were going to attack her again.
That's the reason?
I think so.
They definitely were being lascivious.
He goes, I forgot how pretty she was. The DA,
Right.
the DA's not bad either.
Right. And the other guy, the voice of reason.
What's the matter with you guys?
And the other guy says, just chalk it up to hormones.
Yeah.
There's a lot of strange dialogue
Yeah.
that, again, a lot of it feels like filler. It's like scenes that they would write in a movie.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would just be like, oh, we don't need this. This is slowing it all down. Except in this, I really feel like they were like, oh, well, let's make it a big movie first episode.
Mm-hmm.
Right,
because you could have had those guys just show up at the house and it would have actually been more scary when they showed up.
Yeah, or even just the quick shot of them sort of at the thing, and then we figure out after the fact why they're there. Like show them like sort of staking it out to heighten tension, sort of. But yeah, there's a ton of scenes that absolutely could be cut.
So then we're back at Walker Texas Ranger's ranch. He's not there.
Yeah,
but there's a bunch of circus performers making dinner or making breakfast and setting the table, and Uncle Ray is there. We find out that Uncle Ray, one of the circus performers, who I wish I had looked up that guy's name because that guy's been in a lot of things.
he's been in a ton of things.
But he talks about how he's a juggler. He always wanted to be a sword swallower, but he felt like it would be too difficult. And then Uncle Ray says, you get used to it pretty quick. And he shows a scar that he has because he was stabbed with a bayonet in North Africa in 1943. Like, again, more exposition, more backstory.
And I'm not sure. The way everyone says information like that is just bringing everything to a halt, and they might as well be saying, and here's my backstory.
Mm-hmm.
And the other character would be like, what's happening? Who are you talking to? What's going on? But it's also like a lot of these backstories, like with CD and with Jimmy later, and with Uncle Ray, it's almost like they're building Walker's badass. Like everybody has their special skill or backstory that makes them a badass. Nobody obviously as much of a badass as Walker is, but it also is sort of like, this isn't relevant to this episode.
Right.
Why are we hearing this?
It's the thing that people do sometimes in pilots where they're like, there's going to be really cool stuff about this person down the line, and this is the pilot, so we need to make sure everybody understands how cool they are.
And that's what's fascinating is airtime is at such a premium in a pilot episode where you have so much to establish. And in this episode, it feels like they had too much time.
Yeah. They could do whatever they wanted to.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say they do it one at a time, which is nice. You know, like you know who each of these people is. They intersperse it with various mobs of middle-aged white guys, so that part is confusing.
I guess you need to have people stop and say which white guy they are.
Right. But the bad guys pull up to the house in their pickup, and they're coming to get everybody, or they're coming to get the girl. The juggler tries the other circus performer tries to attack them with his clubs, his juggling clubs.
And I will say that guy, I believe, does his own stunt there. Like where he takes the punch, the actor does, which is interesting. They don't have a...
Well, he works in the circus. You learn a lot of skills.
I mean the actor. That's the character he's playing, Sean. Although I guess he does know how to juggle, so maybe he did work in the circus. That's right. He did
do his own juggling.
I'll also say before we get past this, the moment with the victim of the crime, she leaves the room sort of upset. And not saying anything, and the other woman from the circus basically says she keeps going off. It also has an indeterminate accent. She keeps going off alone. We've tried, but she won't even talk about it. And it's sort of just like all of their attitude is that this woman who was very recently assaulted is kind of just being a bummer about this still,
right,
and not talking and not.
Yeah, that was super weird. Like
very strange.
Come on, open up. This was 3 days ago that you were assaulted like that. What's the big deal? And then, yes, we go out on the porch, and Walker has a 25-minute monologue about his life that we find out everything we need to know, which apparently solves her issues.
Yeah. Oh, wait, does that happen here?
Yeah.
And the other thing he drops there is...
I mean, we skipped over the part where he beats up the bad guys and breaks all their faces. He has a whole thing with one of them where the guy's like, my nose is broken, and Walker fixes it and then goes, it looked better the other way, and breaks it again.
Yeah.
Which is how broken noses work, generally speaking. You can just
like a
twist
switch.
them back into place.
I did enjoy that action moment, though. At least that was pretty. Anything that slipped into him being a little too violent, I was sort of on board for because it had some spice to this pilot. But also, it was in this monologue where he's telling Lisa that she's safe. That he drops the information that his dad was a full-blooded Cherokee. Again, more exposition, used to ride bulls in the local rodeo for money. And that was fascinating to me that they were playing him.
Yeah. Is he of that descent?
So he's a quarter Cherokee. So, okay, then I guess
they made his real life part of the story of Walker, Texas Ranger.
Apparently.
He does at this point talk about how the reason that I don't know why his father gets murdered, but
I think it's because he's indigenous.
Right. And he encounters three men in shabby clothes
racism,
who stink of alcohol.
And he makes a big deal about the carnival, which again,
well, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, is that he says, I must have gone on that Ferris wheel, and I was like, oh, he must have gone on it like 40 or 50 times. I must have gone on that Ferris wheel 6 times.
Yeah.
And that didn't make sense to me. Like, that doesn't feel like a must have gone on big exaggerated number, you know?
That is true. It seems like he's leaning into hyperbole, and then he doesn't. Yeah. But I really was so... Like, as soon as he was leaning into this, and I already had the Alfred piece of information, I was like, are they going full Batman on this? Mm-hmm. And then, because it's already like him seeing Zorro, which is part of the Batman myth, when he's gone to the carnival, then his parents are walking away with him into the darkness. Then they're both killed. It's just like, I can't believe it. They're going full Batman, down to the point where when he visits their grave at the end, it's very much like Batman standing over the graves of his parents.
Right. And he's a multi-billionaire.
Well, there's also that. Yeah, right.
The Walker Foundation.
He does have a giant ranch and a manservant.
I mean, Walker and Wayne are almost the same name.
Oh, is that what the subtext is?
Yeah. So his father gets stabbed and gets killed, dies right there. His mother gets stabbed and dies 2 days later. The girl says, did they hurt you? And he goes, they hurt me real bad.
Sure.
So you have a lot of sympathy for him. And then she wants to know how you get over it. How do you get over a thing like that? You know,
Yeah.
You get over it. You never get over it. You don't get over it.
That's what he says.
Yeah.
Didn't he have some other piece of information?
He says, don't let
you never get over it, but time heals it. What actually is that's the most logical piece of advice that he has in the show.
Right. Time has a way of making things better.
Yeah.
Don't let what happened, don't be destroyed by something that you could not possibly prevent, he tells her.
Right.
And that fixes her.
Well, yes. Then she's fine after that.
She's great. Okay. Now we come in on CD, who's taking him to see his new partner. Now that Mobley's been killed, he's got a new partner.
And of everything in the show, this is the biggest CD just exposition monologue. Grew up in Baltimore on the wrong side of the tracks, got himself a football scholarship at Penn. Even to the point where they were like, well, this is insane. We should have Walker comment on it. And he goes, you sure know a lot about this guy. And it's like he then continues without like a break in the action. Like he's just got a cue card from him. Yeah, Cowboys drafted him. He tore his shoulder all to hell, figured his life was about over. But then getting on the highway patrol is what saved him. It's just like it's endless. He just, and then you know what he did for fun? He tried to modernize the whole department just for fun. And so it's like then it takes this turn. Walker seems like doesn't care.
He even says he's really on the cutting edge, which I don't even know what that means.
He's having him. He's setting him up as like he's sort of streetwise. Then he's also kind of a nerd that's obsessed with modernization. Then he's also an football player, which kind of comes into play because he tackles several people in this episode.
And he's not afraid to do things outside the boundaries of what's allowed.
Yeah, he's sort of an all-purpose partner. But they have to establish that Walker is like, this is going to be kind of also a bickering cops vibes. It's like, yeah, it's just like, when he's talking about the modernization, he's like, yeah, tell you what, CD, next time I'm in a gunfight, I'll read it. And it's sort of like, you're taking up a real strong stance on this thing you know very little about.
I liked when he turned to CD and like so they meet him. He's in a swimming pool.
Yes,
which is an opportunity to just have this guy show off his incredible body.
His physique is in, and I will say this is Theo and Die Hard from Die Hard, who is the hacker in Die Hard.
That's so funny because I was like, is that the same guy?
Yeah, it's the same guy who's also Sundown in Top Gun. And I got to say, that guy really, he plays a nerd very convincingly.
Yeah.
And then you see him get into the pool. It's like, Jesus Christ, look at this.
He's got the best pecs I've ever seen.
Sexiest man alive.
Yeah. In a tiny bathing suit.
And you gotta give him credit for they're like, hey, we're leaving money on the table. Let's for no reason have this scene where this guy's getting out of the pool.
Get a
little beefcake action
in a
here.
thong.
Yeah.
But then Walker turns to CD at the end of that whole scene and goes, I'm gonna love him, meaning he does not love him.
No. Yeah. And is that the scene where he talks about his training drink, or is that the next scene?
I think
training drink. He's getting ready for a marathon. He's carrot juice and parsley.
He's just
Walker's not going to love that.
Complete opposite of Walker.
Yeah, he's just a four-eyed commie nerd.
There's no way this relationship will work out. Walker does not have pecs like that.
They're talking about the information that Jimmy kind of found, and Walker says, I checked too, without computers. I don't use your newfangled
we are
computers.
Opposites. Yeah. And then we're back with the bad guys, and they're trying to get explosives so that they can do something with explosives. And they're talking to a guy named Mr. Cobalt.
And this is one in a series that begins this subplot of interview scenes.
Yeah.
People are just...
Most of which were with Mr. Cobalt.
Yes. Slowly offering their resumes, and...
I worked with the Libyans.
It was just like, yeah, that ain't American. It's just like there's a lot of information it's like that to me is like, I guess that's how when they get later, they track down Cobalt and then they interrogate him, and it's just, this is where the plotting becomes so slow. Mm-hmm. And there's just no need for this pilot to have been this long. that it's just like, and it's the same shot of the bright light behind it, and all these guys in a room that are supposed to have stopped Cobalt from figuring out who he was.
And the guy gets pissed, and he's like, get rid of him and let him know why I don't want him around, or why it's bad to lie in a job interview. So then,
because he lies about the Libyans.
Yeah, and then we see that in a shadow play, we see that they're beating him outside. Like, we don't actually see it happening. We see their shadows on the wall. As
it was more of a stylistic choice than just avoiding doing the stunt.
Then we're back with Walker and Trivette. Is that his name? Trivette.
And then I think Walker keeps calling him Trivet
right.
to aggravate him. And he does it once
works.
in a scene. He corrects him. And then 2 seconds later, really no other dialogue, he calls him Trivet again. And he walks away. And Jimmy goes like, he'll never get it right. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of like, well, he obviously was messing with you.
Yeah. But they have figured out that there's some kind of C4 thing going on, and that they used C4 at the other robbery somewhere that they know about. So they need to go talk to the guy at the gun store, because he's the one who would know who has C4. So they talk to him. He wants them to buy cigs.
Yeah.
They have a little back and forth.
I mean, even as you're going through this, don't you kind of feel the sort of the weight of all the various scene after scene where you're just sort of waiting for it to move forward and just sort of lumbering along?
Well, I also thought it was so funny in the gun store when the guy does not want to give him any information.
Yeah.
And then he finally goes, all right, just between you and me, Walker. And the guy's partner is standing a foot away from him.
Yeah.
You know, like, does he just not see him? Don't tell the guy standing right next to you what I'm about to tell you. But they find out that there's a guy who has rocket launchers and C4,
right?
And his name is Cobalt, and he hangs out at the gun range,
right?
So they go down to the gun range, and Cobalt immediately, he takes one look at Trivette, and he just runs.
He's the same as Walker. He just can't get his name right.
I'm just trying to bug him.
Can't get my name right?
So he runs. He's scared of him, and Walker doesn't understand why. But luckily, this guy was a wide receiver, so he chases him down.
What about what was it, torn knee? That was one thing that I didn't understand. How did this end his career? I don't know about being a wide receiver, but he tore his shoulder, not his knee. That was what it was. I see. So he could still run. Also, it seems like it would give him problems with tackling all these people.
But he does. He catches him, and then Walker drives up, and he's like, "I thought you were supposed to be in such great shape. What's the matter with you?"
Yeah.
Well, I ran, and you drove. I mean,
and he said, "Oh, next time you run, and I'll drive." And he was basically like, "No, I don't think so." And it's just kind of like,
"What if we both drive? What if we both run?" Like, that was all on the table, I think.
It's very inorganic. Their bickering. Although I will say, the Jimmy Trivette, who's Clarence Gilliard Jr.
I hope you're saying that right.
My apologies. I actually think he passed away last year, not to bring anyone down. But he does a fine job in this episode.
Yeah. I
would say he's one of the best performances in the episode.
As far as his acting.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree.
Right, not as the character, but as the character too. He does a lot of good.
Right, he's a good dude. He's
a good cop.
Yeah. Well, he's got a bad
ranger. Do you call a ranger a cop, Sean? Do you know?
I think so. Yeah. Right. He has this whole thing about how he wanted to be the Lone Ranger.
That slowed down. That monologue break, as we'll maybe should call it, was the most astonishing. Of the slow build to that where I come from, there's concrete and asphalt. Nobody can tell right from wrong. It's just really like playing to their fan base of just like city folk, these motherfuckers. And then this guy comes along, speaking with the Lone Ranger, who does what he wants to do, total freedom. and there's these military horns playing in the background.
Yeah.
It's interesting also that he's saying the Lone Ranger. This may be the dumbest question of all time. Is the Lone Ranger a Texas Ranger, or is he just a ranger?
That is not the dumbest question of all time, but it's up there.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he's not like a. Are you saying is he with the National Park Service?
I just didn't know if he's sort of a ranger.
No, he's a Texas Ranger.
In a more generalized sort of. Oh, there you go. Yeah. He's an actual ranger.
So he's a lone.
So he's probably not an official ranger anymore.
He was.
Yeah.
So
he's technically, it's Lone Ranger is a misnomer. He's not really a ranger.
Well, he's alone, but once you
disenfranchised ranger.
Once you go ranger, you're never a stranger.
I've never heard that, but it must be true. It's very catchy.
Yeah. So anyway, this guy wanted to be the Lone Ranger. He was living in The Wire. Now he's on this show, and he loves it. He loves his job, and we find out that he's a little bit like he will cross lines when he needs to, because he busted Cobalt once before, and Cobalt got away with whatever it was. So he went and put snakes in his house.
Yes, and I like the slow build to why Cobalt, every time he even sees him, is terrified. Once he comes into the interrogation room,
he might have snakes,
and he's terrified as soon as Jimmy grabs him by the lapel. And it's just like, and it's just sort of like, why? It's like, well, I put snakes in his house, turned off the power, and it's kind of like, it doesn't quite track.
Yeah. It would not be that immediate, it feels like.
Right. It's like, he's going to strategize against me later.
But at this point, we're on a stakeout or something. I can't even remember maybe Cobalt. So they don't they get a magazine at this point and call somebody or something?
Yes. They set up a meet because Jimmy is going to kind of go undercover, which actually would have been a much more interesting, different plot that they don't do. Instead, they have that the people show up to meet Jimmy, and then
he's getting a parking ticket.
His cops come up and he's getting a parking ticket, or he's getting hassled, and so they see it, they get spooked, and then there's a car chase instead.
The first big set piece car chase of the episode,
right? Which you can I kind of respect, and I have to assume that this show is built on T.J. Hooker style. Okay, these are going to be the big sequences where there's a fight, where there's a car chase, and everything else is just, tenuous connective
window
material to get to the next thing.
Right. I'm guessing, and I think this is what you're saying, I'm guessing that in every episode, at about that point in the show, there would be a big car chase.
Although I wonder, because this was an hour and a half episode, if in a regular episode, when it would come.
Anyway, Jimmy crashes his car. He ends up in the back of Walker, Texas Rangers truck. They chase him. Then they get away. I can't even. I'm so lost at this point not in terms of how complicated the plot was, in terms of my interest. I just was like, I can't.
It really wears you down.
Yeah,
and it's for a show that should be just candy. Like, it's just Walker being a badass. It's just go from fight scene to fight scene. It's amazing how slow it gets in the middle.
It's funny because I'm just thinking about the difference between this show and Spartacus, which was also so much about fight scenes, but so much more compelling
and moved so much faster.
Right.
And it's not, obviously it's not fair to compare because it's, whatever.
50 years later.
Yes. It's exactly right. But it's still just like, you can feel the weight of it as you're watching it.
Mm-hmm. But we get to find out that the CIA guy is no longer with the CIA. He's been freelancing because some money got stolen, and they thought he turned in another guy for doing it, and then it turned out it was him. It's all that kind of stuff that people have been doing for a long time now to undermine the intelligence community here in the United States. And I don't mean to get political here, but
Sean takes it personally because he has a certain history in the intelligence community.
I do. This is where we get to all the Lone Ranger stuff with the sappy horns.
And then we get the attack on the ranch.
Right, which I mentioned earlier, but which actually happens here.
Right.
See, that's the thing. So much of this stuff is so the same to me
Right.
that I get confused as to when different things
Which is
happen.
interesting. In one episode, there's repeated. That's why the interview scene is sort of fascinating to me. Is it's just like there's one interview scene, then there's another interview scene, and then there's also a separate. They're hiring the demolitions expert, and that's a separate testing thing,
Right.
where they blow up a shed, and it's just like that's just so they can see the explosion and have the thing where they're like. When does it go off? 9 seconds. Oh boy! And they run behind the car.
One
and
of
it's
them is
like,
the guy who set the thing.
I
and
know.
He's panicking to run away from that.
and it's just like these aren't even our main characters, or I think our main villains. Then they reveal the main villain again in that scene. It's just so unnecessary. It's such.
My agent is in the car there.
Such. Now, are you saying that because he looks like your agent?
Yeah, he looks exactly the same.
Oh, well.
It was really weird. I was like, oh my God, Doug?
I hope he's gotten your work, John.
He's getting more work than I am. But, okay, so now we're in a scene where the CIA guy is talking to his henchmen, or maybe he's talking to the guy who later becomes his henchman. Like, some of them wear suits, some of them wear more casual clothes. I can never figure out who's supposed to be who, but he's the high status guy. But he goes, one of the guys goes, I knew this was going to come back to haunt us.
Uh-huh.
He's talking about the murder of a Texas Ranger, and he's saying, I knew this was going to come back. As if anyone would be like, don't worry about it, Bob. It's not a problem. No one's going to care.
Everyone always knows if you kill a cop that it'll be quickly forgotten
Yeah.
by the police department.
But they find out that Walker, Texas Ranger, is after them, and they understand that he's the best of the bunch.
But when they come at him at the ranch, this is classic 90s action movie fight ballet because they're all coming at him one at a time. They're all slowly, Oh, wait. Where's you screwed up? You forgot to read us our rights.
That's in that scene.
That's in that scene.
Yeah.
Even though they're attacking the ranch?
Yeah.
And then he says, you have the right, and he kicks him to remain silent.
I would have gone a different direction. I would have said, you have the right and the left.
Oh, see? There you go.
It's a callback to what he said earlier in the episode.
You're absolutely right. Could have been either one.
Makes it more entertaining.
And then Uncle Ray lassos.
You don't have the right, but you have the left.
And then Uncle Ray lassos one of them. So it's a nice little action for Uncle Ray.
Yeah, you could tell he knows how to ride a horse and throw a lasso even before he does it.
And when this happens, he catches the guys at the ranch. At this point, we know about the second robbery. There's been all these interviews. And I'm like, there's like a half hour left of this. There's a third of the show is still left. And I'm like, are they going into like a Heat level movie hold up battle? Like, what is this? And then
we got more to do. We got to go to the bank and interview one of the tellers who, like, was there a guy who came in who was blind? It was about my size, black beard, Stetson hat. Yes, there was.
That's maybe also the teller. Side note, one of the flattest, most robotic performances I have ever seen.
Yeah.
And this is the woman that they choose.
And then she wants to know if Chuck Norris is married.
For the flirty scene, yes.
Right. So there's some kind of...
Now, may I ask you a question? Are you married? It's
Boy,
like...
talk about chemistry, but talk about it somewhere else because it ain't here.
Anyway, Walker, he's not having this lady on Quaaludes or whatever the hell's wrong with her, and he's just like walks away.
Then we see that the other story is over. The rapists are in jail. The circus is going to Waco. Apparently, the circus didn't realize what happened in Waco a couple of days before. There's nobody in Waco
That's interesting.
who wants to. There's nobody in Waco who wants to go to the circus. They've already had enough of the fucking circus for 2 months now. Then we get back to his office, and he's had a package delivered.
That's right. In between these, I think the chief is sort of like saying, look, what happened to Mobley, it's understandable you take this kind of personal. And I'm like, wait, Mobley? I'm like, oh, that's
Mobley?
the innocent cop from the beginning that he's so deeply invested in.
Well, here's another thing I thought was weird. Like you said, this is a long pilot. We're meeting lots and lots of people, and with all of them, we get like, he grew up in a shed outside his parents' garden apartment, and they didn't love him, so he, Then he comes back to his office, and Mildred is there, who's clearly somebody that he works with every day. His secretary or his coworker. I don't know what her job is. I don't know anything about her. I don't know anything about her because he just goes, "Hey, Mildred," and she's like, "You got a package," and that's all we get from Mildred.
Right. Well, you can tell she's got a little attitude, this Mildred.
But I just was like, why are they spending so much time on everybody and zero on Mildred?
Yes. Well, also one could argue, why aren't there more scenes of Walker being a badass if you're going to fill this pilot with stuff? Like, there's definitely moments, but it kind of not enough to really grab us.
Right. But at least we have episodes later on in the series where, like, how there's always the episode where it's like, let's follow this person for the day.
Yeah.
There's a great Mildred episode where they just follow her from, it turns out that she has another job as a coal miner that she does all the time.
Sure, that's how she can defeat those criminals by shoveling coal at them.
Right. Anyway, he goes into his office and he opens the package. There's no card. There's no note. Nothing. Doesn't know where it's from. It's a weird, ugly ashtray of some sort that looks like a toilet seat, basically.
Yeah.
With a fly on it.
Yeah, it doesn't raise any alarm bells.
And then they get a phone call, and the guy goes, "Oh, sorry, wrong number." Like, he directly called Walker's office,
right?
But then goes, "Oh, sorry, this is the wrong number," and that's enough for Walker to realize the ashtray is a bomb.
It's not enough information.
It's just an amazing deduction that he makes.
That's Walker. That's his instincts.
Yeah,
that's why he can't beat Walker.
So they survive the bombing. So
yes.
Him and the other guy are like, they're okay.
Yeah, CD.
But now they got to convince the captain that the 4 banks are going to be robbed, not just one. They're going to rob all 4 at the same time. There's no way you could rob 4 banks at the same time. Walker says you could do it by leapfrogging, which to me is just a classic bank robbery maneuver. You want to leapfrog your way through the banks. The captain is trying to dissuade them from getting involved. He knows that it's personal for Walker.
Apparently.
You take it too personal. Don't take it too personal. And Walker says, "I do take it personal."
Yeah.
So. And
when do you get to Uncle Ray's dream? When does that happen? I guess that's earlier. And because it's like they have this big thing where he's telling you about the dream that's tied into the guy's spider tattoo, and there's a suggestion of like it's like an ominous warning of things aren't going to go right at some
Does that
point.
happen the first time we meet Uncle Ray?
No, it's in the middle.
Oh.
And then it's called back at the end.
The callback at the end, because I guess you know what? I must have fallen asleep or something in the middle because I missed the dream. I got what was going on.
Yeah.
But I just didn't remember it when
happens
it started.
in the middle.
Yeah.
And what's crazy is, as far as I can tell, this ominous dream that they bring back again, they bring the whole show to a halt to play the insulting indigenous folk music behind him as he's telling about his dream, and then bring it back almost in its entirety at the end. As far as I can tell, there's no useful information in that dream that saves
Walker, Texas Ranger?
No, although I guess we're going to get to that moment. But he basically just throws down his gun, chases the guy, and beats him.
Right.
So I don't even know what it's for.
Yeah.
There's also a side thing. There are a ton, and I think we're going to see more as we go back to more classic episodes of television, classic pilots. There's several shots in this pilot episode of this series that are out of focus. They're like close-ups of a person that are clearly out of focus. And I was like, did they just not care as much in this time period because they were, they were figured, well, they'll watch it on TV, or it's just because it's shot on film that they're like, well, they didn't see it. So, or they didn't measure right.
Or did they just not have competent directors who were like, this is what we need to do,
Well, I guess it would be more the DP issue, but
I don't know how these things work. You know what? You know what pilot didn't have out of focus shots?
What is it, John?
Columbo.
Is that true?
Well, because Steven Spielberg, he directed that pilot.
Did he direct the pilot?
Yeah.
I didn't realize he directed the pilot.
Well, it's a weird thing because it's a movie of the week, but the first one was he directed.
Wow. That's a good chunk of change in his pocket.
Although I will say I haven't watched it in a while, so if there are out of focus shots, that's going to change my whole opinion of him. Okay, we're on a stakeout. Walker knows they're going to hit the banks. He doesn't know which one's going to happen first. He wants to know why Jimmy wears eyeglasses if he played in the NFL. Jimmy says he had contacts. He says, why don't you wear those? Women say the eyeglasses changed the shape of my face. There's a lot of...
Just talk about things that you would see in the cut scenes on a DVD that are just like, oh, yeah, I can see why they cut this. Right. They just leave it in. They got to fill out that 2-hour movie time.
This is where CD goes by to go into the bank because he's going to get involved somehow, even though he's no longer a Texas Ranger.
Now, I will say he has this speech on the eve of the big robbery, and it's clearly expositional like every other one of his monologues, but I do really like the writing in the monologue where he's like, well, Cordell, it's clear to me what's going to happen. You're going to ask the banks closed. They won't. You won't get the 9 men you need, so come tomorrow. You'll muddle through it or you won't. Either way, won't change the course of history. And I kind of like that he's laying it all out. These are all the things that avoids having to see more frickin' scenes of pointless dialogue.
Right.
And it's kind of poetic that he's just like, yeah, well, I don't know. We're going to try and stop it, and maybe we'll die, or maybe we won't. And it kind of does lend a little bit of an eve before the battle vibe that I like.
Yeah. It feels, like it feels like he's saying who cares, which makes it very high stakes.
That's another spin. I see it as more of a stoic kind of like, well, we all have to die sometime.
Right. So
he visits the grave of his parents at some point.
Yeah, he goes to the grave.
No, not his parents' grave. It's his best friend Mobley. I thought it was going to be his parents.
And he tells him to go fly with the spirit of the eagle, and his dad is waiting
owl.
for him or something.
Yeah, and then he finishes it with, "It's payback time."
Yeah. So then we're outside. That's where the eyeglasses conversation happens, and then the bomb goes off, and that's where he hears the whole recap of Uncle Ray's dream. Is after the bomb goes off, right?
It sounds right.
A bunch of ambulances pull up to the bank. We know they already had stolen 12 EMT uniforms. Chuck Norris does an amazing forward roll underneath a car up onto the curb.
He rolls like 5 times to get under the car, which seems like that would make him more vulnerable rather than just running behind the car.
One of the bad guys has a submachine gun, which are notoriously inaccurate, so he's not able to hit. I mean, there's literally a moment when Walker Texas Ranger is dancing around bullets that are hitting the ground right around him. Yeah.
It's his Cherokee roots. The Cherokees were renowned for being able to dodge submachine gun bullets.
Everybody runs out of the bank. All of a sudden, a fuel truck pulls up and it starts dumping fuel everywhere. The guys in the bank start shooting in the bank. This is where Walker chases the guy from the CIA down, and they have their... It did feel like Heat at that point, like the sort of outdoor plaza stuff.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, that's kind of what happened in Heat.
Do you think this is where Michael Mann was inspired?
His inspiration. He was like, I got to do something like Walker Texas Ranger. I did Manhunter. Now I need to do something.
We do have to do the Heat pilot that was because he did Heat as a pilot, TV pilot before. Right. So we definitely have to cover that in the near future.
I think I just ran out of patience at this point because I don't have a lot more notes on what happened. So him jumping over the car, that actually happened. Lynn Swan from the Pittsburgh Steelers was running into the end zone to catch the football, did not catch the football, kept running, was running full speed. Somebody had parked a car right behind the end zone, and somehow he jumped over the car, leapt over the car. So
So it's just
I feel like this is based on
just
that.
sports fact.
Yeah.
You
I
know.
feel like this is an homage to the Pittsburgh Steelers of the 1970s. This is also why later on he throws him the towel and goes, "Here, try a Coke and a smile." Anyway, then we just go to the sort of endless coda to the show of...
Oh, before you do that,
Yeah.
this is where we get to Walker. Here's Uncle Ray's dream in his head. No apparent connection to what's going on. Throws down his gun. I guess that's what he learned, to throw down his gun and face him hand to hand.
Mm-hmm.
And then faces the guy. And it's clearly this is the Lethal Weapon moment. And there's mano a mano. And he beats him, as we know he's going to.
Fairly easily. Yeah.
And so that's why I'm kind of saying, like, it's a weird moment of all this stuff has been done building up to that this show is about to Walker, Texas Ranger. And there's not that much with Walker solving the problem at the end, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Nonetheless, he beats them. And as you're about to say...
Then they have their charity rodeo to take care of. And Jimmy gets dressed up like a clown. And he's like, I can handle this, no problem.
Right.
Then we find out that Walker is going to ride a horrifically dangerous bull into the ring.
Right.
The announcer says, here's Walker, Texas Ranger riding 2,000 pounds of death and destruction. And Walker didn't know. He's like, I should have known you put me in for this. He had no idea that he was going to be riding a bull like that.
He did. He won this championship before. There's no end to Walker's abilities.
Right. So he rides it for, however long it's like 8.3 seconds or something.
Yeah.
That you're supposed to stay on the bull.
8 seconds, right? Or is it
No,
8.3?
I don't know. I don't know
Sean,
rodeos.
you used to be a rodeo rider.
I rode in a rodeo once. I'm not even kidding.
I think you are kidding.
No, I'm not.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah.
Tell me this story.
Well, it's a long story. I'll tell you when we're not recording.
All right.
But eventually he gets off the bull. He's on the ground. Jimmy comes to get him, and they look back, and the bull is pawing at the ground. And I think it was Jimmy who said
hoofing at the ground.
He was stomping his feet.
He was
on the ground.
clawing.
Yeah.
Bulls have claws. That's their.
And Jimmy says, "Does that mean he's going to charge?"
Uh-huh.
And they kind of go, "Uh-oh," and then they both run, and it's that classic, old school TV ending where they both leap up into the stands, and then it just freeze frames on the two of them in midair.
A very, the classic ending on a quote joke, cop show kind of moment. And I do wonder if that was their pattern from then on, that it's just sort of like they have some lighter scene
at the end.
Yeah.
Which was like 10 minutes long, though.
Very long. And it's, again, the whole plot is totally this subplot is totally unnecessary, is introduced very late. It's one more thing of, Walker, I tricked you into being charitable.
CD puts him in the middle of this. Well, that's why he goes, I should have known when he's called out to ride the bull. So there it is, Walker, Texas Ranger. I did not enjoy myself for the most part. I thought it did some things that you're supposed to do in a pilot, which is like, we understand who all these people are. We're not going to forget, except for Mildred. We don't know anything about Mildred, but everybody.
It really got under your skin.
They didn't do it in a way that I found compelling or interesting.
Yeah.
But they serviced each character in a way that made them memorable, except for anybody bad who's not going to be back.
They were definitely, some might say the characters were too well defined in terms of all the exposition.
Right.
But they weren't defined in a way that was interesting, really, other than Walker. But yeah, I mean, you can definitely see it's in the wake of this episode where it's like, yeah, that's what the episode is. We're hitting our target. And you can see why it would have gone 9 seasons, because it's so fulfilling the promise of a Chuck Norris concept, other than I would have liked to have seen it be a little bit more ass-kicky and almost having him be more stoic. But maybe they thought, well, if he's more like movie Chuck Norris, then you're not going to be able to sustain those relationships. So we got to soften him a little. I also do feel like with all the kid stuff that they were aiming for like a kid demographic. And as I say, I would love
Which
to
makes
know.
sense, because I think it was a show that came on like on Wednesday nights at 8:00 or something like that.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
The other thing that happens is when you have all these bad guys and then you get rid of them by the end of the episode, you need a lot of people to fill that space every week. So can I just read you a list of some of the people who appeared on the show?
Please.
Luis Guzman,
Wow.
Giovanni Ribisi,
Amazing.
Toby-
Even very young.
Toby Maguire,
Uh-huh.
Danica McKellar.
Tobey Maguire was a villain or he was just a guest star?
I don't know. I just
Right.
saw a list of people.
Okay.
But to your point, these guys all would have been very young at that time, which
Yeah.
means they're trying to do...
They might have been in the Haley Joel Osment kind of, kid roles.
Right. Doris Roberts,
Okay.
Robert Englund.
She probably wouldn't have been in one of the kid roles. Uh-huh.
Robert Englund, Burt
Freddie.
Young,
Uh-huh.
Max Martini. Do you know Max
No, who's
Martini?
Max Martini?
He's been in a million. He always plays like a soldier or a cop. He most recently was on Bosch as a cop,
Okay.
but he's like that guy who in everything. You
Yeah.
know, Mila Kunis, Rowdy Roddy Piper,
Wow.
Danny Trejo, who was actually one of the kid roles.
He did have a machete though.
Yeah. Dean Norris,
Uh-huh.
Lee Majors.
Wow. I wonder at what point in his shows that was. This must have been post Fall Guy.
Yeah. Deion Sanders played himself on the show.
Uh-huh. Also jumping over a car.
I'm guessing he was friends with Jimmy from,
Oh, definitely.
something. Yeah. John Schneider,
Uh-huh.
Joan Jett, Ernest Borgnine, Dionne Warwick,
This is an impressive list of guest stars.
Mark Cuban,
Wow.
Hulk Hogan,
I don't know why I gave the wow to Mark Cuban.
Selena Gomez was the last one, who probably would have been 8 or 9 years old. So
Yeah, so it's just like it's a good launch. This is like Disney. The amount of kids this launched,
yeah,
because he would train them. He would train them how to sing and dance. Chuck Norris would.
he loved singing and dancing.
We're at this point in the show where we're still not sure if we should rate it. We don't know if there should be some kind of an evaluation process.
Would you watch episode 2?
No.
Neither would I.
And I think that is probably the definite thing that we should evaluate in every episode.
Yeah.
I guess that goes along with, would you give this the green light if you were?
That I would, because it's like a no-brainer. Like it's
Like there will be an audience with it. You just wouldn't watch it.
right. It would sustain itself. Like I think you could tell right away we have a hit on our hands.
Right.
Haggis is already halfway through the screenplay of $1 Million Baby because he's so disappointed the show is so good.
He's already sweating and having nightmares.
All right. Well, folks, that is our show. We will be putting out episodes on the first and third Sunday of every month. So check back then for new episodes. We are Co-Pilots TV on all social media. And you can also find us on copilotstv.com. If you want to know where to watch these pilots, I would do it in your living room on TV. But you can also check the show notes to find out where the place is that you can find each pilot.
You want to take that one again?
No, I don't.
Okay. Well, then there you go. You nailed it.
Yeah.
So whether you like our show or, you have other feelings about our show, just give us a 5-star review, rate, review, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. It'll be very helpful to us. You'll get your pilot's wings. And subscribe to our Patreon.
One of the things that will be on our Patreon is Andy and I are going to have a karate fight.
That's true. If you want to see that, it might be. We do our own stunts, so we're definitely going to be injured.
My nose is broken.
Oh, yeah? We'll see about that. How about now?
Still broken.
How about now?
It's fixed.
But how about now?
Broken again.
So until next time, just remember, it's payback time.
Your dad is waiting for you.
What's your dad is waiting for you?
He says that about Mobley.
Oh, is that what he says?
Yeah.
That's hilarious. And just remember, guys, we did this episode for Mobley.
He was so innocent, so young.